All right, sixth grade, chapter 15 or chapter 14 and 15 study guide question time. So we will jump right into it. Number 1, in what ways was Spartan education? Oh, I have a typo. In what ways was a Spartan education different from an Athenian education? All right, so remember, Athens and Sparta have a lot in common because they're both Greek. But this question is about their differences. So what is different between the two? An Athenian education, as Aristotle put it, is focused on developing a well-informed, skilled citizenry. So in Athenian education, citizens, boys and girls could receive an education first off. When boys received an education, they were taught to read and to write. They were also taught rhetoric. They were taught how to give speeches. They were taught how to make arguments. The idea of an Athenian education is to be very, very skilled at speaking and thinking, right? And also to become virtuous, to become a well-rounded person, a good citizen. Spartan education is pretty much about one thing and one thing only, becoming a soldier. So Spartan education was kind of like a military camp. When you reached a certain age as a boy, you were taken away from your family. You were put in barracks with other boys. You learned how to use weapons. You learned how to hunt, how to fish, how to set traps, how to march, how to obey orders. Spartan education is very punitive. Right? So they wouldn't give you enough food on purpose, and then you would have to steal food from the weak ones in order to feed yourself. But if you got caught stealing, you'd be severely punished. Right? So Spartan education is all about becoming a soldier. Athenian education is all about becoming a well-rounded citizen. Now there is one thing that the two had in common. Spartans, like the Greeks, understood it was very important that their citizens be able to read and write. So Spartan boys did learn basic reading and writing skills, but that was mostly because they thought soldiers would need to know how to read and write in order to be good soldiers. All right, number 2. Like most religions, another typo. Oh, Mr. Bruce failed. Like most religions, ancient Greek polytheism was based on something. Christianity has the Bible, and the church as its bases. What were the two sources that the ancient Greek polytheism was based on? So ancient Greek polytheism did not have any religious texts or sutras or anything like that. Instead, ancient Greek polytheism was based on mythology and the works of Homer. That's pretty much it. And what are the two works of Homer? Iliad and the Odyssey. Right? So they got their belief system out of these stories. Right? And most Greeks understood that the stories were probably not factual, right? But they were a way to learn about characteristics of the gods and goddesses and the power that the gods and goddesses had over your everyday life. So they were useful for encouraging people to adhere to Greek values when it came to the god and goddesses. All right, number 3, what social and economic factors helped Athens develop its democracy? Oh, this is a great question. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons that Athens became democratic. So where should I start? Okay, I would start with oligarchies. So over time, Athens starts off as a kingdom. Kingdom falls apart, and it develops an oligarchy, right? But when a bunch of changes occur in Athens, that oligarchy turns into democracy. So what are these changes? Number 1, we have the phalanx. Phalanxes are popping up in Sparta. They're popping up in other city-states. They pop up in Athens too. The phalanx increases the importance of the poor foot soldier. So it's a very important, powerful military formation, a good tool for the city-state to have. So if you're a foot soldier and you're a member of the phalanx, you're probably going to demand better treatment by your government, maybe more rights. All right. Another thing that caused Athens to begin to experiment with democracy is discontent with oligarchy and tyranny. So Athens was often sort of like on the edge of war, and reformers like Solon, for example, realized that a good way to prevent war, to appease citizens, was to give citizens more power by creating things like the assembly. All right? So there's reforms from Solon, from Pericles, from Cleisthenes. There is the emergence of the jury. So the jury is a big factor in shifting power away from a central government and towards the citizens. There is the development of the Athenian Navy, which, just like the phalanx, increases the importance of just regular poor soldiers that are not from the upper classes. So the Athenian Navy relies on rowers. So rowers begin to demand more from their government. Another thing that shifts Athens in the direction of democracy is Athens starts to become very wealthy. It becomes to become a center of trade, commerce, and culture. And so members of the lower ranking classes who don't own land, merchants and artisans, foreigners and metics, they start to develop wealth. And as they become wealthier, they naturally become more powerful. Even though they're still part of lower social classes, they can use their wealth to pressure the government to make concessions to them. All right, so that's what causes Athenian democracy to occur. Number 4, we spent a lot of time talking about the ways in which the city-states were divided and independent from one another. Although Greece was not united, all Greeks had a few things in common. What were these common Greek traits? Language, culture, religion, geography. So with geography, I would include things like diet. Right? All right, so those are the 4 basic things that united all Greeks. Also, Greeks participated in, so they were very independent from one another. They didn't really interact with one another except through trade and warfare, with one big exception, and these would be festivals and the Olympics. So festivals and the Olympics were ways for the different Greek city-states to have competitions with one another, friendly competitions. Athletic competitions would be the Olympics. Festivals would be competitions among like poets and artisans and people like that. So that helped to unite Greece, even though Greece was never actually fully united. Number 5, why might direct democracy not work well in the United States? Because we have too many people, right? Direct democracy worked in Athens because Athens was very small. It just had a few thousand citizens. It's a lot easier to count the votes of a few thousand citizens on an issue than to count the votes of hundreds of millions of citizens like you'd have to in the United States. In the United States, we do not have a direct democracy. Instead, we have a representative democracy in which we elect people to vote on our behalf. So this is why in the US, usually when there's a new law that's created, the people don't vote on whether or not the law is created, right? Laws are created by elected representatives here in the United States. In Athens, the people vote directly on the laws. Number 6, describe the structure of Athenian democracy. So, basically, there's 3 parts to Athenian democracy: the assembly, the council, and the courts. So the assembly was the main body of Athens. It was made up of all male citizens. They would vote directly on issues. They would meet in the Acropolis 40 times a year. At least 6,000 members had to be there in order for the assembly to actually do anything. They would vote on issues. The council was a group of 500 citizens who decide which issues actually go before the assembly. So the assembly shows up to vote on issues, but the people who decide what issues they're actually going to vote on that day are from the council. And the council was basically in charge of running the day-to-day operations of government. Things like making sure the harvest is good, making sure we have enough taxes being collected, things like that. Finally, there's the court system. The court system dealt with cases and used juries. They did not use judges or lawyers. Yes, so that's it for Athenian democracy. What does Greek art and architecture like the Parthenon say about what Greek cultural values? Okay, so it shows that the Greeks, and by Greeks here I really mean the Athenians, valued beauty. They wanted their art and their architecture to last the test of time, right? So the Parthenon is made of stone. It is made of well-fitting stone pieces that kind of fit together like building blocks or puzzle pieces. So if there's an earthquake, the building's not going to fall down, right? The fact that they use columns and a frieze, for example, shows that they care about aesthetics, right? They wanted it to be physically beautiful. They wanted people to paint on it and sculpt on it. Right? So it shows they care a lot about architecture. They think design is very important for their city-state. All right, number 8. How do the forms of Solon, Cleisthenes, and Pericles lead to the development of democracy? I've kind of already answered these questions. Solon, Pericles, and Cleisthenes each took different steps in moving Greece away from oligarchy and tyranny and in the direction of democracy. They increased the number of people who could count as citizens. They paid poor people to participate in government in the form of a jury. So that way it wouldn't just be always made up of rich people who could afford to go to the Acropolis that day. They built the assembly and established its power as a governing body. What else? They took power away from aristocrats, right? They limited the power of the oligarchies by shifting most of those functions over to the assembly. All right, next one. What kind of relationship did the Greeks believe they had to the gods? What did they believe about the impact that the gods had on the world? So the Greeks believed that their gods lived among them, literally. Like they thought you could be walking around the street one day and you see somebody like who looks like me, and then they'd point at him and they'd, wow, he's so amazing looking. That must be one of our gods. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. Now, the ancient Greeks believed that their gods had human bodies, that their gods lived on Mount Olympus and often came down from Mount Olympus and interacted with people. They thought their gods were very similar to people, not only in appearance but also in behavior. They thought their gods cared very much about the Greek city-states. So they were very good about building temples to their gods and goddesses and giving sacrifices to the gods and goddesses. Greek religion, pleasing the gods and goddesses, was a very important part of daily life and of political life, of festivals, of the Olympics. They would start public meetings with prayers to the gods and sacrifices. So they thought the gods controlled everything from the weather to the harvest to you personally, right? So they thought the gods cared about the Greeks, were very involved in their lives, but also, if you would anger the gods, then the gods could severely punish you, right? This is what happens, for example, to Odysseus, right? He angers Poseidon, and Poseidon gets revenge. All right, next one. What happened? Oh, okay, got it. Why was the phalanx important for the development of Greek democracy? Kind of already talked about this. The phalanx was made up of poor foot soldiers. meaning any male could basically be part of a phalanx, because all you needed was a sword and a shield, or a spear and a shield. The phalanx became probably the most formidable fighting tool on the ancient Greek battlefield, right? So before the phalanx, the most important soldiers on the battlefield were those on horseback and those who had like expensive armor and expensive weapons. So rich people, right? Because only the rich could afford that sort of stuff. After the phalanx, the most important people on the battlefield became the phalanx. And so these members of the phalanx would say to their governing bodies, we're not going to fight today unless you give us X, right? They would use their power, their influence, to pressure their government to give in to what they wanted. All right, that is it for the study guide questions. You have one more video about what you need to know for your test. And that's it. All right.